The headlines come fast, the rumors spread faster, and the world feels like it's burning on more than one front. Ukraine, Gaza, Taiwan, the South China Sea. It's hard to keep track. In this video, we slow things down. We put each crisis in order, explain why it started, what's happening now, and ask the only question that matters. How close are we to the next escalation? We need to be clear from the start. This is not a prediction of the next world war. It is not about fear or sensational headlines. It is about clarity. Because today, with so many crises unfolding at once, confusion and disinformation can be as dangerous as the conflicts themselves. What we will do in this video is simple. We will look at the world's main flashpoints one by one. We will explain briefly why each crisis started, what is happening right now, and why it matters for the United States. Not in theory, but in concrete terms: energy, security, and stability. You will see how the war in Ukraine, the conflict in Gaza, the tensions with Hezbollah and the Red Sea, Iran's nuclear program, Taiwan and the South China Sea, and North Korea's missile tests are all part of the same global picture. If you want clear analysis without hype and without fear, subscribe to SafetyZone. Let's begin. Let's begin in Europe, with the war in Ukraine now entering its third year. To understand today's danger, we need to remember how it started. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and armed separatists in the Donbass region, igniting a conflict that never truly ended. For 8 years, the fighting simmered until February 2022, when Moscow launched a full-scale invasion. Its goal was clear: to break Ukraine, force regime change in Kyiv, and redraw the map of European security. That plan failed in the opening months, but the war has ground on, and the costs keep rising. Right now, the battlefield looks different than it did 2 years ago. Russia has shifted from trying to seize territory to trying to break Ukraine's resilience. Over the past weeks, Moscow has launched wave after wave of missiles and drones against Ukraine's power grid. This is not random destruction. It is a calculated strategy to leave millions without heat or light, to cripple the economy, and to convince civilians that resistance is futile. At the center of this danger is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It is the largest in Europe, and it has already lost reliable external power. Nuclear reactors need steady electricity for cooling. Without it, even a temporary outage could risk a meltdown. The International Atomic Energy Agency has warned repeatedly that the situation is unstable. For Washington and its allies, this is not just a local issue. A nuclear accident in Ukraine would send fallout, literally and politically, across Europe. Ukraine has not stayed passive. In response, Kyiv has begun striking deep into Russian territory. Drone attacks have hit oil refineries, forcing temporary shutdowns in Russia's energy industry. On the surface, these look like small raids, but the impact is strategic. Russia finances its war through oil revenues, and every refinery put out of action cuts into Moscow's ability to fund the military campaign. For the United States, why does all this matter? Because Ukraine is not only fighting for survival, it is also testing the credibility of NATO and the resilience of global markets. If Ukraine collapses, Russia would not stop at Kyiv. Pressure on Eastern Europe would rise, NATO's security guarantees would be questioned, and authoritarian regimes elsewhere would take note. Economically, every attack on energy infrastructure means higher global fuel prices, higher inflation, and pressure on American households already stretched by costs of living. Looking ahead, the risk of escalation in the next 30, 60, or 90 days is high, high, and high. A miscalculation at Zaporizhzhia, a missile that strays into NATO territory, or a Russian strike that goes too far could change the nature of this war overnight. What should we watch most closely? 3 things. First, the stability of the Zaporizhzhia plant. Second, the scale of Russian attacks on Ukraine's grid as winter sets in. And third, NATO's reaction if the war edges closer to its own borders. And while Europe faces this storm, the Middle East is already on fire. The next flashpoint takes us to Gaza, where one of the world's oldest conflicts has erupted again with new intensity. If Ukraine is the center of gravity in Europe, the Middle East remains a fire that never truly goes out. To understand today's crisis, we need to go back to its roots. The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians dates to 1948, when the State of Israel was created and the first Arab-Israeli war erupted. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, a trauma still remembered as the Nakba, or catastrophe. Over the decades, more wars followed. Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza after the 1967 war. Peace efforts repeatedly collapsed, and Palestinian politics split between Fatah in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. Hamas, the political and military organization that governs Gaza, is designated as a terrorist group by the United States and the European Union. This history created a cycle of violence that erupts again and again. The most recent eruption came on October 7th, 2023. Hamas launched a massive attack inside Israel, killing civilians and taking hostages. It was the deadliest day for Israel in decades. In response, Israel began a large-scale military campaign in Gaza. Since then, the war has devastated the enclave. Thousands of civilians have been killed, entire neighborhoods flattened, and the humanitarian crisis has reached catastrophic levels. At the same time, the West Bank has seen rising clashes between Israeli forces, settlers, and Palestinian militants, turning the conflict into a two-front crisis. Why does this matter for the United States? Because Washington is Israel's closest ally, providing military aid, diplomatic cover at the United Nations, and political support at home. Every escalation pulls the U.S. deeper into the crisis, forcing it to balance unconditional support for Israel with growing pressure from global partners and from its own citizens. For America, this is not just about foreign policy. It is about credibility in the Middle East, stability in global energy markets, and the possibility of being dragged into a wider regional conflict. The risk of escalation is medium in the short term, high in the coming months, and very high if the conflict drags on. Gaza could ignite the wider region, drawing in Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria, or even direct involvement by Iran. What should we watch most closely? Whether fragile ceasefire talks succeed, whether the West Bank tips into full-scale revolt, and how far the United States is willing to go in trying to mediate or contain the crisis. And this conflict does not stand alone. It connects directly to another flashpoint on Israel's northern border and to the waters of the Red Sea, where the world's trade routes are now at risk. That link runs north to Lebanon and out to the Red Sea. On Israel's northern border stands Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shia movement with a political party and a powerful armed wing backed by Iran. It emerged in the 1980s during Lebanon's civil war and the Israeli occupation, and it has built a large arsenal of rockets and missiles meant to deter Israel. Far to the south, in Yemen, the Houthis, also known as Ansar Allah, a Zaidi Shia militia with Iranian support, fight a long civil war and now target shipping to pressure Israel and its allies. These are different fronts, but they are tied to the same regional contest. The current picture is tense and unstable. Along the Lebanon-Israel border, daily exchanges of fire continue. Hezbollah launches rockets, anti-tank missiles, and drones at Israeli positions. Israel responds with airstrikes on launch sites, command nodes, and supply routes inside Lebanon. Civilians on both sides of the border have been displaced. Each side tries to manage the tempo to avoid a full war, but the margin for error is thin. A strike that kills many civilians, a hit on critical infrastructure, or the death of a senior commander could break the pattern and trigger a rapid climb up the escalation ladder. In the Red Sea, the Houthis have attacked commercial vessels with drones and anti-ship missiles and attempted raids against crews. The aim is to raise the cost of trade and signal that the Gaza war has consequences beyond Israel. The United States and allied navies patrol the sea lanes and intercept many threats, But even limited attacks drive insurance premiums higher and force some shipping companies to reroute around Africa. That adds days to delivery times and raises costs that ripple through global prices. Why does this matter for the United States? Because a northern war between Israel and Hezbollah could pull in Iran, directly or through its advisors and proxies, and that would force Washington to choose between deeper involvement or the risk of a regional collapse of deterrence. U.S. forces are already present in the region, at sea and on land. A wider conflict would raise the threat to American bases in Iraq and Syria, test air and missile defenses, and demand sustained naval deployments. In the Red Sea, the stakes are economic and strategic at the same time. The Bab el-Mandeb, a narrow strait linking the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, is a global choke point. If attacks persist or intensify, shipping will divert, energy flows will slow, and American consumers will feel it in fuel prices and in the cost of goods. The risk of escalation sits at medium in the near term, climbs to medium high over the next 2 months, and turns high if the Gaza war persists or a single event breaks the current limits. The most likely triggers are a mass casualty strike in Israel or Lebanon, a saturation rocket volley that overwhelms defenses, an Israeli preemptive push to remove Hezbollah rocket threats, or an attack at sea that sinks a large merchant ship. Any of these could move the region from controlled confrontation to open conflict. What should we watch? In the north, pay attention to Israel's northern command posture, evacuation policies in border towns, and any sign that Hezbollah is deploying more accurate, longer-range missiles. Indicators of Iranian Revolutionary Guard involvement on the ground would also matter. At sea, track the pace of Houthi launches, the number of successful interceptions, and whether major carriers keep rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope. If rerouting becomes the norm, costs will rise and pressure on Washington to neutralize the Red Sea threat will grow. And all of this connects to the core of the region's long game, Iran's nuclear file and its network of partners. That is the next flashpoint. And behind Hezbollah and the Houthis stands the power that connects them both, Iran. To understand why Iran is central, we need to go back to its nuclear program. It began in the 1970s under the Shah, slowed after the 1979 revolution, and then restarted in the following decades. For years, Iran insisted its program was for civilian energy. The world feared it was for weapons. In 2015, after years of negotiation, Tehran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, a deal with the United States and other powers. Under it, Iran limited its nuclear activity in exchange for sanctions relief. But in 2018, Washington withdrew from the deal. Since then, Tehran has steadily expanded its nuclear work, enriching uranium far beyond civilian levels, now over 60%. Weapons grade is 90%. The gap is narrow. Today, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog, is back at the table. Iran has agreed in principle to restore some inspections, but doubts remain. How much uranium has already been stockpiled? How fast could Iran build a weapon if it chose? Analysts call this the breakout time, and many believe Iran is closer than ever. Why does this matter for the United States? Because a nuclear-armed Iran would change the entire balance of the Middle East. It could spark an arms race, push Saudi Arabia and others to seek their own programs, and embolden Iran's regional network of partners from Hezbollah in Lebanon to militias in Iraq and Syria. For Israel, it would cross a red line. Israeli leaders have long said they will not allow Iran to get the bomb. That means the United States could be drawn into a military confrontation not of its choosing, either to support Israel or to try to prevent the region from spiraling into war. The risk of escalation is medium now, medium high over the coming months, and high if inspections stall, or if Israel decides to act unilaterally. Any sign that Iran is moving from enrichment to actual weaponization, designing a warhead, preparing delivery systems, would be the tipping point. What should we watch? whether the IAEA gains real access or only symbolic gestures, whether Israeli rhetoric shifts from warnings to preparation, and how Washington balances pressure and diplomacy, whether it doubles down on sanctions, opens a new round of talks, or quietly prepares military options. And this is not just about the Middle East. Because as Washington manages Iran, it must also look across the Pacific, where China and Taiwan are testing the limits of American resolve. And while Iran keeps Washington's attention fixed on the Middle East, another front demands constant vigilance across the Pacific. Taiwan and the South China Sea are not just distant disputes, they are flashpoints that could shape the century. To understand why, we need to go back to 1949, when China's civil war ended. The Communist Party took control of the mainland, while the defeated nationalists retreated to the island of Taiwan. Ever since, Beijing has claimed Taiwan as part of its territory, a province waiting to be reunited. Taiwan, however, developed its own government, its own democracy, and today sees itself as a self-ruled nation. Washington does not officially recognize Taiwan as independent, but it does arm and support it, maintaining what is called strategic ambiguity, leaving unclear whether the U.S. would fight if China attacked. In parallel, Beijing has expanded its reach in the South China Sea, a body of water through which 1/3 of global trade flows. China has built artificial islands, complete with airstrips and radar, turning reefs into forward military bases. These outposts reinforce its territorial claims against neighbors like the Philippines and Vietnam. One hotspot is Scarborough Shoal near the Philippines, where Beijing has tightened control despite protests. The situation today is tense. China's People's Liberation Army, or PLA, has stepped up air and naval activity around Taiwan, sending fighters and bombers across the median line that once served as an unofficial boundary. Naval maneuvers simulate blockades, raising fears of a rehearsal for invasion. In the South China Sea, Chinese Coast Guard vessels have used water cannons and aggressive maneuvers to block Philippine resupply missions. Each move tests the resolve of the United States and its allies. Why does this matter for the United States? Because Taiwan is not only a democratic partner, it is also the center of the global semiconductor industry. The chips made their power everything from smartphones to fighter jets. A war or blockade would cripple supply chains, trigger a global recession, and directly hit the U.S. economy. Strategically, failure to defend Taiwan would shake the credibility of American commitments in Asia and beyond. The risk of escalation is medium today, medium in the near future, but rising to medium high if a crisis or accident occurs. The most likely trigger is not a deliberate war plan, but a miscalculation, a collision at sea, a misfired missile, or an incident that spirals. What should we watch? The scale of PLA air and naval sorties, new construction on disputed islands, and how Washington and allies like Japan, Australia, and the Philippines respond. Joint exercises, freedom of navigation patrols, and military aid to Taipei will signal how far the U.S. is prepared to go. And while China tests the Pacific, another unpredictable player is stirring once more on the Korean Peninsula. And just beyond China, the Korean Peninsula remains one of the most unpredictable flashpoints of all. The division dates back to the 1950s when the Korean War ended not with peace but with an armistice. The peninsula split into two states, South Korea, a U.S. ally and democracy, and North Korea, a closed dictatorship that became a dynastic regime. Today it is ruled by Kim Jong-un, the third generation of the Kim family to hold power. Since the 1990s, Pyongyang has pursued nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them. Despite sanctions, isolation, and periods of negotiation, the program has advanced steadily. Over the years, North Korea has carried out 6 nuclear tests and dozens of missile launches, including short-range, medium-range, and increasingly long-range systems. Its goal is clear: to guarantee regime survival by holding enemies at risk, including the United States itself. Right now, North Korea is closer than ever to a fully operational intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. That means a missile capable of reaching U.S. territory, not just allies in Asia. Recent launches suggest Pyongyang is testing solid fuel systems that can be fired more quickly and are harder to intercept. At the same time, North Korea has deepened its cooperation with Russia, supplying artillery shells and other munitions in exchange for technology and political cover. This new partnership gives both countries leverage against the West. Why does this matter for the United States? Because North Korea is one of the few states with both nuclear weapons and the intent to threaten the U.S. homeland directly. Every new missile test tightens that threat. For Washington, it also destabilizes the broader Asia-Pacific. South Korea and Japan feel pressure to expand their defenses, while American forces in the region remain on constant alert. Each move raises the risk of miscalculation, a test mistaken for an attack, or a clash at sea or in the air. The risk of escalation stands at medium today, medium in the coming weeks, and medium high if Pyongyang stages another nuclear test or shows clear progress on a missile that can deliver a nuclear warhead across the Pacific. What should we watch? Signals of a new ICBM test, possible preparations for a seventh nuclear detonation, and the pace of cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow. Equally important are U.S. and South Korean military drills, which North Korea portrays as rehearsals for invasion and often uses as justification for new provocations. Taken together, these crises from Ukraine to Gaza, from the Red Sea to the Pacific, show a world where pressure is building on every front. And the real question is not only where the next flashpoint will erupt, but how the United States chooses to respond. We've moved from Ukraine to Gaza, from Hezbollah to Iran, from Taiwan to North Korea. Each crisis looks separate, but they all have something in common. They stretch American attention, they test alliances, and they raise the chance of miscalculation. And the more fronts open at once, the harder it becomes to manage them all. It's important to recognize something before we close. The flashpoints we've covered tonight are not the only crises in the world. From the Sahel in Africa, where jihadist groups are destabilizing entire nations, to the Caucasus, where Armenia and Azerbaijan have fought over Nagorno-Karabakh, to political unrest in parts of Latin America and new tensions in South Asia, the list goes on. But there is a reason we chose to focus here. Ukraine, Gaza, Hezbollah, Iran, Taiwan, North Korea, these are not just conflicts. They are the ones with the greatest potential to draw in major powers, to spiral into confrontations that affect every American household. That is what makes them global flashpoints, not just regional wars. And that leads us to the bigger picture. The world today is not shaped by a single war, but by a web of crises that interact with each other. Each one pulls on alliances, tests economies, and stretches attention. The challenge for the United States is not just to respond crisis by crisis, but to decide how much it can invest in holding the line everywhere at once. That is the real question of our time. How to manage a world where every front seems active and no front can be ignored. This video is not an alarm, it is a thermometer. The more clearly we see the fault lines, the better prepared we are to recognize where the next shock may strike. So let me ask you directly, of all the flashpoints we've covered tonight, which one would you like us to explore in depth in the next video? If you want to go deeper, tell us in the comments which crisis you think deserves a full deep dive. And if you value clear analysis without the hype, make sure to subscribe to SafetyZone. That way, you'll always have the context you need when the headlines break.